Metal Hellsinger, a badass name for a badass game. Coming from the outsiders and published by Funcom, this game is definitely just that, fun. And while you can play it on all the major next-gen platforms with the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and of course the PC, there are some ways of playing that are honestly just better. For instance, the game is on Xbox Game Pass and on the PC Game Pass, so you can play it cheaper there. But speaking of price alone, it is cheaper on PC at $29.99 US instead of the console premium of $39.99. Another thing, as of the day of recording, there is now mod support on PC to change out your own custom songs instead of the ones that are put in place by the developers, so that's also really cool. Otherwise, for performance and things like that, I've seen great quality from the console and the PC versions. The game is pretty well optimized, and I don't really foresee hardware being an issue for anyone, except for the fact that on console you'll pretty much have to use a controller. Now this all comes down to personal taste, but as an FPS as this game is, I personally feel most at home using a mouse and keyboard with a shooter where you need to focus on both where you're shooting and when you're shooting, something that's not always the case. There aren't things like machine guns in the game, so you can't spray and pray and things like that, and just hope for the best. You really need to have precision as well as timing. Now with your need-to-knows out of the way, my name is Falling Hurts, and if you like this video, this review, and want to see other reviews of a like-minded nature, go ahead and check them out on my channel or consider subscribing if there's more. I really like doing these Game Pass reviews especially because sometimes players on other platforms might not know, and knowing that I don't get paid for these yet, it's really easy, low risk to reward for doing these reviews. It's really fun as well. That being said, let's hop right into one of my favorite games that have released this year, probably right after Elden Ring. You play as the Unknown, a demon who's looking to overthrow the Judge of Hell and get your voice back. You'll go through 8 levels in order to defeat her aspects and eventually overthrow the Judge, and that's really the short form premise for the story that they basically tell you off the bat. That's the prophecy of the Hellsinger that they say, and honestly the story's nothing to really write home about. There's pretty clear sequel baiting at the end that I won't spoil, but that's really about it that's interesting. Otherwise, I really just don't feel that's what this game's about. Now, Metal Hellsinger, as the name so blatantly does suggest, is a game about music. Specifically, yes, you guessed it, metal. Each level has at least one unique track featuring the vocals from these people. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the genre as a whole, so I don't know most of these people or the bands they come from, but I did know Serj Tankian from System of a Down. But I gotta say, the soundtrack is fucking epic all the way throughout. And if you're looking to stream the game, don't worry, as they own all of these tracks and they've only hired these people for the vocals. These are owned by the developers, so you're not gonna get copyright struck. So this, with the mod tools, is a really nice gesture of goodwill from the developer, and I really appreciate that. Now back to the music. The tracks themselves are actually pretty catchy, they're fun, and pretty well varied all the way down to the beats and the tempos of each level. The beat is super important, as Metal Hellsinger is actually a light rhythm game disguised as an FPS. It's here also that I'd suggest that you kind of need to wear headphones for this game. Being connected to the audio, and specifically the beat, is a must to really mastering and enjoying the combat of this game. With your multiplier building from 1 times to 2 times, and then 4 times, 8, and then all the way to 16 times, you'll get more damage on attacks, and as you build these multipliers, more layers are added to the song. Starting at basically just the beat, it then adds tracks on top of it all the way to 16 times where your vocals are added in, and that's a really big motivator to have a high score. Once again, it can't be stressed enough just how badass this game is. The music and the damage incentives make it super aggressive. Playing as a demon-like creature, you have wings that will allow you to double jump and dash. On top of that, you've got enemies that can glow orange when they're near death and they're stunned, so that you can finish them off and get a little bit of health back and build up your kind of rage meter. All of these come together to make a pretty similar gameplay loop to Doom Eternal, which is one of my favorite games, but it adds so much more with the music inspiration as well. The beat isn't, of course, the only part of your arsenal. The weapon variety is pretty good. There's dual-wielding revolvers, shotguns, explosive crossbows, and a few others. Each one's rate of fire complements the tempo of a certain song, as some levels have a really slower beat, which it's all pretty fast, but some have a slower beat, some are super fast and it really, supports the revolvers per se, but then some just support the slower crossbow. But regardless, I recommend switching your weapon often. Don't ever just use one all the time. As much as it is nice to have a favorite weapon, that's not always the case here. As I mentioned earlier, every weapon has like a little rage meter that builds up as you get more hits with it, and then once that's done, every weapon has an ultimate ability that you can use, say like a flurry with the sword, an aspect of yourself that also shoots with you as like a kind of decoy for the revolvers, a bunch of different, very unique special abilities. But outside of weapons, your arsenal also has sigils, which are perks that you can unlock by completing random gameplay modifiers called torments. And these are pretty simple for the most part, but the benefits of these perks are really nice, and all you really have to do is complete like a little challenge room or time trial. Not to mention, it's really just another way to shoot things in this game, which is super fun, and I can't stress that enough how much of a plus that is. Now, as for what you're fighting with these weapons, that's pretty much where my entire issues of the game come into play. I want to start by saying that I think the enemy designs are really dope. The marionette demons, which are literally the first ones you ever come across, are super unnatural moving, and it's just creepy by design. I really like the ramp up to power from enemies as well, so as you get more new ones revealed, they get a lot more dangerous, and honestly ideal for this kind of game. Now, I do wish that there were a few more enemy types throughout the game. I feel like they kind of blew their load really quickly, and the last couple levels, I think maybe only one or two thing was introduced. And I would have liked to see a little bit more better pacing with the enemy, like introductions, perhaps maybe held on to one or two a little bit longer, or ideally had a couple extra ones to throw in there at the end, even if they were just variations of previously created ones. But overall, that's not too big of a deal. That's kind of a thing for me with shooters. I really noticed the pacing of things like that. One thing I can say for sure that I was not a fan of were the boss fights. Each one had a gimmick for sure, but every one of them was just visually another aspect of the judge, so they all looked very similar with slightly different headgear. Visually to me, as I said, this was super boring. When the rest of the game was so vibrant, it just seemed like such a shame. Don't get me wrong, the fight themselves weren't terrible, but being limited to pretty much the same boss encounter mostly made it super easy to learn and defeat these. Again, the gimmicks only go so far in making these fights feel dynamic, when really it's just the same thing over and over again to top out every level. But overall, I really believe the combat is challenging at first, but enjoyable overall. As you get better with it, it gets way more satisfying to go back with your unlocked guns to the previous levels and just tear right through the things that gave you trouble before. I have beaten the game already, of course, and I'm still trying to get higher scores on the levels to get up the leaderboards. It's a really satisfying loop, especially if you enjoy shooters. I really just wish the enemies were a little better to facilitate an even better combat cycle. Now, having covered the music and of course the gameplay, the only other real thing that I wanted to mention were the visuals, and I'd say probably the visual style. First off, the game goes really hard with the menu presentation, and I'm just going to play this here. This is just really awesome, and I really love the way the game presents itself as metal as fuck. As I'd already said, performance-wise the game does really great as well, and truly it does not come at any cost to any visual fidelity. For as fast as you actually move through these areas, the enemies look really good, and the levels look really nice as well. The environmental variety specifically is diverse enough from cityscape to hellscape, and even mountainscape, I guess? And there's always really something fresh to look at, and very rarely do I ever feel that something overstays its welcome. The cutscenes of the game, however, are all drawn art, and they move very slowly and methodically. And while it does have really nice voiceover, I can't help but feel that it doesn't fit the visual style of the rest of the game. And I know this is a budgetary reason that they didn't do 3D assets for cutscenes and things like that, but really that's it. Perhaps in, say, the sequel where we get to see, more, I would like to see that expanded to where the story is facilitated in a much more, I don't want to say canon, but to where it visually fits and thematically fits with the rest of the game. Metal as fuck all the time, and in your face. Regardless though, that's my overall thoughts. To summarize, I think the combat was probably the highlight of this game, but you can't have the combat of this game without the music. And I think the music choices that they do have work really well, especially for someone who's not a heavy fan of metal. And even with that being said, I really enjoyed this game. I don't do number scores, but this, to me, as far as games that I've reviewed, is probably one of the highest of the games that I've ever just reviewed. And while I did mostly play this on the PC Game Pass, I have already decided to buy the game for myself. I'm going to play it on Steam, that way I can do proper mod support and things like that, and to me that's something to consider while getting the game as well. You may want to look to getting the Steam version if you're going to want to mod the game at some point. PC is always better in this regards, especially even with controls and things like that. So overall, I consider this game a must-buy, especially for shooting fans. And don't be thrown off if you're not a super rhythm-based person, because this game was definitely not in my wheelhouse as far as that goes, but it drew me in, and once I started wearing headphones, the first couple times I played it, I made the mistake of not. It drew me in hard, and I cannot get enough of this game. I've been playing it non-stop. It's only like maybe 4 or 5 hours to actually beat the game, but let me tell you, this game is fun as fuck. But really, that's it for me, guys. My name is Falling Hearts. I thank you so much for watching this video, and consider subscribing. If you don't want to, then hey, I guess don't. Maybe consider liking it, I guess. But that's really it. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.